Welcome back to the Director's Chair. This is our weekly live stream forum in which we explore the intersection of leadership and creativity. Today we're going to talk about a topic that is consistently top of mind in many respects, but perhaps especially relevant right now, and that's the relationship between creativity and stress. And strong leadership is, of course, inherently creative in many ways, and leadership is by its very nature a calling that carries with it some measure of stress. I mean, stress comes with the territory, right? You sit down in the chair of leadership. Part of the privilege is the burden that the leader carries. And creativity, as well, as we talked about last week, is a risky endeavor. Any venture you set on has the potential to bring about change, will also be stressful. I mean, so let's face it, we're living in a period of especially high stress right now. I mean, the world as we know it has been turned on its head in many respects. Leaders in the public and private sector all around us are managing through national and global events affecting public health and welfare, the global health of the economy, the marketplace, and really, I mean, let's face it, the systematic infection of our very social fabric as a nation. And you cannot step into any leadership position today without coming face to face on some level with the tensions born of these events. And speaking of tension and the comfort with it, before we jump into our discussion here on the relationship and correlation between stress and creativity, I want to take a moment here just to call back to our prior discussion, kind of relate it back. In our last couple of sessions, we spent some time exploring the traits of the most creative leaders and the makeup of highly creative teams. So at the individual and the group level, we touched on curiosity, we touched on optimism and inclusivity, creating a safe place to explore and create, courage and resilience. We touched on the importance of a sense of safety and the importance of diversity, with comfort with candor and providing constructive feedback, and that comfort with tension and the importance of leveraging that in the creative process. I mean, these traits and outlook are critical to the creative process, of course, and highly creative leadership. And I would posit that highly creative leadership and creative solutions and these very traits are needed, most especially in situations in which much is riding on the line and when stress and tensions are going to, of course, be at their highest. But the problem here we have is that stress left unchecked and unmanaged can be an inhibitor of creativity. I mean, we seize up, we go back to our default settings, right, to what's most comfortable, and we may be more likely to risk making decisions from a place of fear, perhaps the most suboptimal place from which to create as well. So we'll open it up here. The question we'll start with today is the relationship between, again, stress and creativity. Is that necessarily negative? And if so, how do we combat this individually and how we self-manage that, and then at the group level as well? And speaking of combating it, Tom, after graduating from West Point, you were a combat officer and served in Afghanistan. I think you led 50 soldiers as a captain. You're a Ranger and Airborne and air assault qualified. I know you've seen some stressful situations, my friend, and perhaps more stressful in many ways than the average civilian will see. So can you kick us off here, Tom? Speak to us about whether or not you feel like it's true that there's a negative correlation between stress and creativity, and if so, how do we manage that? How have you dealt with that in the past?
So I will give you a beautifully cop-out answer. So I will say, yes, stress can be an inhibitor of creativity, but it can also add to creativity. And let me go a little bit further. It's the power to go, what road you go down, that choice solely resides with you, the person who's experiencing that stress. Same situation, two different people, or maybe one person in two different points of time might choose a different route to go down, and they can react completely differently, and it can have a completely different effect on themselves, on their body, on their team. I didn't really know. So going back to, the military training and stuff, when you do, boot camp and you're changed from a civilian to a military personnel, you are putting through some really tough duress, right? Physically, mental, emotional duress. And this is where you first learn that, you're not always going to get coddled. Things are not always going to go your way. You are going to fail, right? You will fail. But it's how you're able to deal with these setbacks and how you're able to deal with these pressures and succeed despite these, what seems to be overbearing outside forces. And so in the military, there's a lot of, stress that they put on you. But the reason why they do that is that when you are put in that combat situation, you learn how to survive. You don't shut down, right? You learn
Mm-hmm.
how to interpret these outside forces and how to manage existence with them. And I didn't really understand the science behind all this until quite recently, actually. Laura, who we all love, she's an amazing resource here within N2 Growth. She started this thing called Wellness Wednesday at N2 Growth. And so every Wednesday, someone's, I don't want to say responsible, because we really honor this thing to come up with a topic for Wellness Wednesday. So someone is, awarded the opportunity to come up with a Wellness Wednesday topic. One of the ones that we dealt with not so long ago was actually right in the precipice of all this crazy COVID stuff, was dealing with stress. And I came across, somebody on the team put across someone, her name is Tracy Fisher. She was a graduate from the U.S. Military Academy, where she played soccer there, Division I soccer. She was an aviator and then played soccer for the Army Ranger team. Very accomplished woman. Now she started her first fitness company in Washington, D.C. She has 3 children, very stressful job there, launching a company there. And she's the director of 2 Cleveland-based wellness companies, the Wellbeingness model. And what she did was she did a video for us at N2 Growth on how to deal with this stress. And really, the stress itself is not bad. What is bad is our perception of that stress. And the way that I see it is that, like, when you're stressed, right, your heartbeat starts beating fast. Like you might be breathing a little bit deeper and quicker. But the way that I see it is, like, we have how many thousands of years of evolution of our bodies changing and adapting to the outside world, right? That just the body wouldn't make those adaptations if it was harmful for us. Right. And so, but what is harmful for us is today how we react to that. If we feel our heart beating and we're breathing heavily, well, then we can get tunnel vision and we think that, the world's closing in on us. Instead, think of that as, well, my heart is beating faster. I'm getting more oxygen into my body. I'm learning how my body's getting ready. It's getting warm to react to whatever's being thrown my way. And just change your perception that it's not your body closing in on you. It's actually your body getting you prepared to meet these stressors, to accomplish them, to beat them, to come out on top. And so if you're able to change that perception, it actually enhances your performance. And so that's what I say that, is a long answer, right? But that's why I say that it depends, right? It depends on, number one, what that stress is. Maybe that stress is just overwhelming and it's too much for anybody to bear. And that's quite possible. And in cases like that, sure, absolutely, it's going to inhibit the creativity. You're going to get the tunnel vision. You're not going to be able to see and be aware. Or, maybe it's not overpowering and you're able to kind of look around corners and use it and your body's physiological responses to be able to combat that. So yes and no is my answer there, Dan.
But bottom line, it comes down to, Tom, it sounds like, I think the most important thing I'll take away from that is that it comes down to how you react to it, to how you perceive it. And then as to whether or not you can leverage that for the good as well. Brian,
if you think about, currently, just to use a perfect example that's in everyday pop culture right now, The Last Dance. Everyone's talking about The Last Dance and Michael Jordan. The game-winning buzzer shots that Michael Jordan say. Do you think he's not stressed in those situations? Do you think he doesn't feel a lot of pressure on him? Do you not think that he's having his heartbeat elevate and he's breathing? Of course he is, 100%. But he deep down knows that he's a champion and knows that he's going to come out on top. It's the way that your body is changing those stressors to use it to your advantage instead of a detriment. Sorry, go ahead.
Know thyself, right? That's the secret. So, Brian, I'm curious. One, you've served as well. We've talked in previous sessions. You've kind of guided us through the importance of tension in the creative process in and of itself. I'd love to hear your views on this, and maybe specifically, and Tom spoke to this a little bit as well, can stress be a motivator and catalyst for creativity? And if so, how do we manage that? How do we leverage it?
Thing, yes, I did serve, and the largest piece of stress I had was, Private Kibby, I need you to type this very quickly and get it out. And I would say, yes, sir, I'm the right man for the job. So it's very stressful at times for me. So when it comes to stress, we have to have it. And a good leader, director, whether you're a non-commissioned officer in the military or an officer or a director, you have to have stress to perform. I do a lot of public speaking. I'd raise my hand for the past 30 years for every opportunity I could possibly get to talk to students, classes, whatever the case is. Mm-hmm. And my daughter is going to school this university this fall. I used to ask me, you don't seem stressed before you do this, but are you ever stressed? And I always say, Kate, I have butterflies every single time before every meeting, because you want a meeting to go well. Before a live stream, I suspect we all have butterflies. If you don't have that, we can call butterfly stress. If you don't have a certain level of tension, a certain level of stress, you probably, as Tom was pointing out, I'm sure Laura has studied and knows well, you're not likely to perform at your best. Pavarotti, famous opera singer, every time he would go out to perform, before he got on stage, he would say, "Now I go out to die." Because unless he had that stress, unless he had that extra tension, he couldn't really perform at his best. What's interesting, though, is our job as leaders is to understand how much stress an individual, and really know our teams. If you could be wherever your job is, know our teams enough to know how much an individual can take and how much the team at large can take. Because what you don't want to do is put them under so much pressure that they can't perform, or they don't perform at their best, or they shut down, as Tom outlined. So you really have to get to know your team and understand how much stress to put on them. But make no mistake about it, you do have to put pressure on your team, yourself, in order to perform.
Yeah, Brian, I love that. And Laura, I'm curious as to we talked about this many times in the past, and you've studied this. But Brian, there's something that I love the way you characterize that. I think you might even be able to, I might even posit here that you could really distill the role and responsibility of a leader, and in any process, creative or not, in knowing and understanding your team well enough to channel the pressure in just the right ways and just the right amounts to get us where we need to go without redlining for too long. And if that becomes overwhelming and that stress is not or pressure is not channeled away or channeled in the right ways and filtered into the right places, then that was your fault as a leader, potentially, for not having conducted that orchestra properly in order to kind of keep all the ships kind of moving ahead without caving in.
And preparing them properly.
Yeah, it's a very good point.
You got to make sure that they're well prepared, so they've seen the movie before, they've seen certain elements of it, so it's not so shocking to them, whatever that may be.
Yeah, no, very, very good point. And so expectation management at the front, we talked about that a little bit last time as well. Laura, what thoughts do you have here in terms of, again, some of the science behind some of this? You've counseled many of us on this, to Tom's point, and helped us to understand what the mental and physical and psychological effects of this can be and how we manage it.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So, I think one thing that's really important to remember, and both Tom and Brian have touched on this, is stress is adaptive. There's a reason that we feel stress, and it's a reason that has helped us survive and evolve, to Tom's point. So, stress is what enabled us to run away from predators or from, tribes or other groups that were a threat to us. So when we have two nervous systems, right? We have our central nervous system, which is our brain and our spine. And then we have our autonomic nervous system, which includes the parasympathetic, sympathetic, and enteric nervous systems. And these are the physiological responses to stress. So this is things like digestion. It either speeds up or it slows down very quickly, almost instantaneous from stress. Pupil dilation or contraction, I guess would be the word. Respiration, right? Heartbeat, all of these things, physiological, and it's preparing you to fight or flight. And this is adaptive. But what is a challenge in today's world is that's not a one-time or a few and far between type of thing, right? Like, oh, there's something we have to hunt and chase. Nervous system cranks in, right? It could be an everyday thing. It could be a chronic thing. And so when people are experiencing that, especially in the current situation, right? You have so much stress. You're trying to work from home. You're trying to homeschool. You're worried about disease, all of these things, the economy, that chronic stress, that chronic physiological response can be really dangerous. And, you know, and you see this actually too in executives with burnout. You know, you see people who have heart attacks and strokes and all of these other things that are largely directly related to chronic stress because your physiological systems are just in this overdrive all the time. So I think as leaders, there's two things that are really important to do. The first thing is what we talked about last week and other weeks, and that's to cultivate a culture of vulnerability. Because if people are already in a stressed out environment and they feel like they cannot fail, then they're going to be more stressed, and they're also going to not put themselves out there as much as they could. Because when you're in a stressful environment, you will fail, right? Like to Tom's point, there's going to be times where you fail. So you have to be enabled to do that and to move on. And so a leader who shows vulnerability in that sense is going to help to cultivate the ability for the team in a high stress environment to know, hey, I'm stressed, we're all exhausted. There's probably going to be a chance of failure, and that's okay. Let's keep moving forward. The second thing that's really important is that I think leaders, and this is kind of what Brian touched on, but Tom as well, is that you have to train the team to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And you see this a lot in military training, even in degree programs that are highly demanding, certainly in sports. I mean, for swimming, and I think other sports, you start the season kind of level, and then you crank up, right? Hard, because you want to adapt the body and the mind to be able to handle that level of stress without breaking. So that by the time you reach the peak of the season, you reach the battle, you reach whatever it is, you know, the big pitch in the boardroom, you've been building and learning to handle that stress as individuals and as a collective. And it's up to a leader to be able to understand how to successfully increase stress, help everyone navigate it and manage it, and get comfortable being uncomfortable. And then that's when you know that your team is ready, regardless of the situation.
Oh, that's great. I think so. Summarizing kind of 2 points. One, your responsibility as a leader. You have to cultivate an environment of vulnerability, freedom to fail, right? That safety is really, really critical and important. So the second thing being conditioning. Another way of saying it. You've got to be able to train the team, manage expectations, to Brian's point, like this is going to be stressful. So let's get in the right mindset. And then kind of control that flow such that you don't completely burn them out, that you've prepared them to kind of move up to what might be the breaking point if necessary. You'll be able to draw us back from that as you move as well. Very good.
Dan, I want to bring up one point though. It's at the end of the day, I don't want people to misconstrue what we're saying and think that like we're all robots, right? And we can, you know, train our people and speak and stuff like that's not what we're saying at all, right? I mean, yes, there is a way that you can condition people to be like that, but just like any sport that I played, there's also time when you take a week off, right? And I found that sometimes when you take that week off, you're actually stronger or better that following week because it gives your muscles and your mind everything a time to relax, digest, and get back to normal. And it goes back to Laura's point that, you know, back in the day, if you think of like the adaptive part of stress is when you're running away from something and then you stop, right? And it goes away and you can go back to normal. But chronic stress is an issue. And so as leaders, you know, Brian and Laura touched on it, that you have to like push people and show them, you know, how to manage that, right? But you also have to know how to get to that ledge and then also how to pull back. You need to understand your team when to pull completely back and help them relax and get everything off their mind. And that's essential. It absolutely is. And I mean, I don't want to say that like, we don't want to misconstrue and say we're all robots here. A big thing that we do on Wellness Wednesday too is mindfulness training and meditation, time where we can just shut off literally everything. Shut off everything and let the stressors go away. And we're trying to minimize that chronic stress to the best of our ability. So your people are not robots. You can train them and you can get them to better handle it. But you also need to learn how you need to reel it back and pull it completely off to make sure that, you know, we are human beings at the end of the day.
Sometimes you have to reset, like we talked about, and I think a couple sessions ago. Brian, you had a point there.
Can we flip it to values and stress. And I'm not talking about obvious issues of right and wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So if people have their personal North Star, and I'll give you an example, people have a tendency to be really stressed when they're being or trying to be something that they're not, or trying to do work that they're just not a good fit for or right for, and trying to prove something to a boss or a teammate or themselves that they can do it, and it's just not their gift. And I see that almost on a daily basis. And I confronted myself. I'm currently working on an interesting project, and I stopped and I said, I am not good at this. I'm not the right person for it. And I was caught up in trying to do and be something I was not for a moment, and I moved it on. So when it comes to stress and values, understand what your values are. And values are, your North Star is what I'm good at. And I'll give you an example. Someone said to me a couple years ago at a party, we're friendly but not friends, but he's known me for about 25 years. And he said, can I say something to you? And I said, sure. He said, you know what I tell people about you? And I said, no. He said, you're the only person who's gone as far as you've gone and have done it completely your own way. And that was an early North Star for me. I just said, A, I'm going to have financial literacy. And B, I was going to be authentic. It's going to be real and be who I am at almost in every setting. And when I get into a stressful environment, that's my North Star. And it's, for me at least, it's calming. So that's part of my values.
Yeah. Hey, Brian, you just brought us back to one of Tom's earlier points, which was know thyself. Right?
Know thyself.
It's critical. That's a very good point. Hey, Tom, Laura, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's completely spot on. I think that because when you are following your North Star, right, when you're aligned, the stress has a different feel, right? It feels more manageable. Maybe you feel that it's worth it. You know, this is stressful right now, but I'm aligned with my personal values, my personal North Star, compared to when you feel like you're misaligned or something about your life is incongruous. And I think that that's really important for a leader. And this is something we've talked about in previous sessions is, you know, helping to find and develop people into a place where they're the best fit, right? Because a lot of times employees will just, you know, be like, yeah, this is what I was hired to do. And I don't want to disappoint my team or my manager or myself. So I'm just going to keep doing it, even though there might be a little bit of misalignment. And so being able to, I mean, that's stressful in and of itself, right? Like how many of us have been in the wrong fit, whether it was, you know, personally or professionally? It feels off. You have what is called cognitive dissonance in psychology. And so that's already stress. So then if you're in a stressful environment, you know, it just compounds everything. So I think that's such a good point, Brian, is that if you are authentic and you are following what you want to do and what you're good at, then that just makes everything more manageable, including stress.
An example would be, I mean, the topic here is always the director's cut. We put ourselves in the place of directors and characters and actors and actresses. And where a actor or actress may fall short when they start to perform for the director, meaning they perform for what they think that director or boss might want. And that's not what the director wants from you. What the director wants is they're trying to pull out your authentic performance, your interpretation of the character. He or she is not trying to do, don't perform for me. I'm just trying to pull out the best of you. And that goes back to your authenticity. So what happens is we start to perform for what we think our boss wants, and that's good. But what your boss is really trying to do is pull out, that's why they hired you, interesting ideas and creativity and things that they hadn't thought of. They're just trying to pull out the real you. So for me, having that North Star around authenticity and doing what I'm good at, but stretching myself as well, keeps the stress somewhat, within reach.
And Brian, to your point, a really good director, a really good leader is going to be very gifted and very skilled at drawing out the most authentic versions of the people that they're working with, right, and creating that kind of environment so that they feel that they're following their own North Star as well. But yeah, Laura, to your point, when we're off the right path, we can feel it.
Yeah.
There's just something inside us that just clearly indicates something's wrong. I got off on a tangent somewhere, and I got to find my way back to the path. So, Laura, I want to take it back to something you said. You were talking about chronic stress. and sort of left unchecked, we can only redline for so long, right? I mean, we shouldn't. That's eventually going to kill us. It's going to kill teams. It's certainly going to kill creativity.
Cause burnout.
Cause burnout, right? And so, I mean, Brian, you talked about this a little bit as well, and our responsibility to our teams is, of course, to know them as individuals and as groups, to know how much they can take and where they are at, where their most optimal operating level, because there's always going to be some measure of stress. Our job as leaders is to control it, channel it, move it away, protect our teams from it, perhaps. But Lord, to your point, we can't really do that unless we know ourselves really well and our own breaking points. So, and you touched on this a little bit, Laura, but I want to dig into it a little bit. Can creativity as an outlet? I mean, there's got to be different ways that we can manage our own stress. To Tom's point, we got to reset. We got to take a step away. We've got to find a way to release some of that stress so we can come back stronger. What are some ways that we can do that? And we've read about and talked about in the past creative outlets as a really great way to fill our own cups and or perhaps help to manage stress and release some of that. Is that something that you agree with? And if so, maybe what are some things that happen to us as people when we're creating that might be helpful in managing stress as well? Maybe the importance of hobbies, perhaps also. What are your thoughts there?
Yeah, I mean, I think that having creative outlets is so important. So I think that there's two ways that you can look at this, right? Because sometimes you can remove yourself from a situation, you can take a step back, kind of like Tom was alluding to, and go work on another activity, right? So I want to touch on that in a minute. But first, what do you do when you can't remove yourself from a situation? How do you manage stress, right? So this is kind of what I was talking about getting comfortable being uncomfortable. Sometimes you can't just, take off work for the day, or the stress is positive. You're preparing for a presentation, you're preparing for a performance. You have to have that stress. But sometimes it becomes too much and you have to reset. So two outlets and tools that I really like that are actually very creative in their essence are visualizations and body scans. And you can do those anywhere. And you can do those when you cannot leave the boardroom, you cannot leave your office. So obviously it has to be in a time when you can give a little bit of mental focus to something different, but you don't have to leave the environment. And you can do it in just a couple of seconds. It could be 30 seconds. It could be 2 minutes or more. But a body scan is when you just take some time. So maybe you're at your office, right? You can't leave. And you close your eyes and you start with your toes and you visualize and you imagine every single body part and you pay attention to it. So you start with your toes and then you go to the ball of your foot, and then you go to your ankle, and then you go to your calf, and you slowly imagine going all the way up your body. And what this does is it reduces that autonomic nervous system, right? It forces your mind to focus on something different. And because you're visualizing something, you get that creative side of your brain going. So you have this huge physiological and psychological change, and you don't have to physically move. Like, you don't have to leave. Again, it could be 30 seconds where you just do a quick scan of your body, and you can pay attention to something, right? Like, oh, my right knee itches. Oh, my left shoulder is a little sore. So you start to just change your thinking. The other thing is a visualization. And again, you can do this anywhere, and it can be as long or as short as necessary. And this is where you think about, where do I feel relaxed? Where do I feel safe? And you just close your eyes and you breathe deeply. You can do box breathing during it, right? That Tom brought up, or just deep rest. And you imagine yourself there. What does it look like? What does it sound like? What does it smell like? And that's very creative, right? It's almost like reading. You imagine, you start to create pictures in your head. So that's something that I like to suggest for people when they can't physically go work on a hobby or can't remove themselves from a stressful situation. But if you can, I think, everyone needs to find something that gives them flow. And this is what we've talked about before. And I'm such a huge fan of flow because magical things happen when you're in this state. And that's the activity, whether it's, maybe it's painting or sculpting or drawing or cooking or gardening. It's usually something that requires a little bit of movement, a little bit of tactile ability. It could be running or swimming, rock climbing, but whatever the activity is, there's a creative component, and it's something that you do and you get into a state where you lose all sense of everything else. Time passes, you have no idea, you don't hear other things going around you, you're just in a state of flow and you're just focusing on that creative outlet. Maybe you're playing piano. And I think it's so important for people to have that creative hobby outside of work, outside of being a parent, outside of all these other things that we identify ourselves as. Oh, I'm a senior associate. I'm a dog mom. I'm like all of these identities. Just take a step back and just do whatever creative outlet that lets you hit flow.
I need your help, Laura, and work with my daughter. Because before a speech tournament, I would always say, Dad, what advice do you have for me? And I would say, wait, just get in flow. And she would go, what is this flow? What does that even mean? What are you doing? Why do you always say that? You're going to help me, Laura.
Okay, I love flow.
Next time I'm in a meeting and someone looks at me and I'm just doing this, they're like, what do you do? I've never heard of body scan before. I'm just thinking about my feet right now.
Laura, I think you kind of pulled us all in there for a second. I'm wondering, maybe this is what it actually means to use the force, right? It's like get into your state of flow. But practically speaking, Laura, I love you touched on a couple of things there. One, there's some immediate sorts of things we can do in the moment to help to manage stress that are on some level creative. If we can't get away, if we can't remove ourselves, if we don't have the ability to completely reset, we have the ability to just kind of take a moment, take a breath, get into ourselves. And there's some practical sorts of exercises that we can do there. And then, of course, there's the importance of maintaining. And I'm very hypocritical when I say this because I'm not good at hobbies. But the importance of maintaining some sort of outlet that can physically and mentally remove us from our everyday. That will force us to reset on some way and on some level as well.
Yeah.
Tom, any thoughts here? Like maybe how you do that? I mean, we were talking about this quite a bit at the beginning, the importance of completely taking a break for the team, stepping away, doing something fun. What are some ways you do this?
Yeah, well, to Laura's point, I mean, flow is incredibly important. And I know we talked about this before in a previous cast that we did about cooking, right? Cooking's my flow. And to kind of help get into that, I put on music and whatever that mood is, and I start singing the lyrics or whatever it is, and I'm concentrating on singing, I'm concentrating on a little bit of this flavor, a little bit of that, and I totally forget about everything else, right? It might only be 20 to 30 minutes while I prep whatever I'm prepping, but it's 20 or 30 minutes of bliss, right? When I'm not thinking about work, I'm not thinking of a phone call I have to make or a difficult conversation. That's all gone, right? And so it's a way to reset and to really re-energize myself. Now, to what Laura said, like sometimes you don't have that escape, right? Sometimes maybe, when we get back to normal and people are in a boardroom, you can't leave that boardroom, right? You're there. And one of the things that I did was I would, you have a notebook and you're taking notes, I would sometimes doodle a little bit, right? Just to kind of draw, whether it's, a stick figure or draw lines, and whatever it is, it just had me concentrating on a page where I'm just kind of envisioning what they're saying, but also just trying to bring creativity to it one way or the other. And so that's a great way to do it if you're in the moment. I know I brought it up last week with the heads up, right? That heads up game with the cell phone. I mean, that took probably 7-10 minutes with a very stressful and, high, very tense situation. But, 7-10 minutes is not going to kill anyone. And that 7 to 10 minutes was ability for everyone to reset, to recharge, to change the immediate environment. Another thing that I do is I might be working, we're all on our computers all the time, right? Our computers are our cell phone. We might be taking notes or anything like that. I might switch it up and then I keep it right next to my desk, is I might switch it up and I might start writing in a notebook instead, right? And so it just switches it from staring at a screen and numbly, monkeying the keyboard to bring it into a different, medium and writing it out. So it's just little ways to switch it up and to make sure that life isn't so mundane, to give that like creativity and that spontaneity, keep that alive.
Brian, Laura, do you have thoughts on that as well? I mean, I think what Tom was beginning to touch on here is maybe once we've got ourselves, like we've managed ourselves, we're in an optimal state as leaders. Ideally, we've released our stress. We're coming fresh. We can see our teams then stressing, and we're in the midst of a high stress project, and tensions are getting high. Are there some activities that maybe you've employed in the past, or that you can think of, or have heard about, or participated in, that in the moment can serve to inspire creativity in what is otherwise a very highly stressful situation that we can do with groups as we move?
It's just something that I think about a lot. And that is, there's a guy named John Wooden. He's the winningest NCAA basketball coach. He's won 11 championships with UCLA. He's since passed, but after he retired, he became this sort of sage on the stage, and he was famous for this. During games, you'll often see other coaches still today screaming and yelling at the players and just going berserk. And Coach Wooden was known for just sitting calmly on the bench, regardless of the circumstances. And his view was, we did all the prep and practice. I believe in my players. There's a whole host of messages. He was obviously navigating the game and leading his team, but he was chill during the games. And that level of confidence, that level of whatever he was trying to accomplish with his teams, put the team more at ease so they can perform at their best, because they didn't have a coach screaming and yelling at them. It was a theatrical message. It was all those other kinds of things. Was able to better put his team in flow, as Laura and Tom were describing. So I often think about that when I get too much, or if I'm pushing my team too hard. I have to find some way along the John Wooden way, is a good example for me, to let them know that I believe in them and that, I'm here for them, but they're just getting flow. Do your thing.
And sometimes that's just maybe, Brian, to your point, the leader's job is to be the safe place if done well. And so sometimes you just gotta, maybe even if it's an act, even if it's a bit of a performance, sometimes just kind of keeping yourself calm so that everyone else remains so.
Well, one of the things that I do is as a leader, how many times are you walk into work and you go, oh, how are you doing, Jen? How you doing, Jim? And they go, I'm good. And you're like, okay, good morning. And that's it, right? But maybe you're in a really high stressful situation. You go, hi, Jen. Hi, Jim. How are you? They're like, we're okay. You're like, Jen, how are you? How are you really? Right? I don't want to just one word answer. What's eating you right now? Name one thing that's bothering you. I, for one, am pretty upset that this due date that was supposed to be on Friday has now been bumped up to Wednesday. It's kind of eating at me, but it's going to be a hell of a Tuesday, but I guess I got to get it done, right? But then and then they're like, oh, well, kind of, just it spurs that conversation where not everything is always good, right? Sometimes things are tough, but you have to make it okay for people to talk about it, or to kind of say what's on their mind. And I think by doing that is you're unleashing creativity, because maybe that gets Jen to open up and tell you a problem that she's having. And then maybe I'm like, oh, well, my due date was pushed back till Friday. I have some free time. Let me help you. Maybe we can put our ideas together, or whatever it is. And that creativity can be unleashed just by, having a little bit more of a good morning statement, right? And so that's one thing that I use is I try and, talk to people and kind of get a little bit, and especially in our world, we're all on our cell phones or, the social media or whatever it is, we're not really talking to people anymore. And so I really try and get back to the basics sometimes to do that. Another thing is realizing when someone is stressed, to give them that ability. If you're going to let them be vulnerable, as you should as a leader, for them to express themselves, when you realize that they are in a point of vulnerability and they are incredibly stressed, and maybe it's not, I need to be there for that person because he's not going to I need to be there for him. Maybe it's not that. Maybe Jim, just needs a break, right? Maybe he just needs to disconnect. And as a leader, you need to realize that and honor that for that individual. Brian, you brought this up. Because this is the director's chair, so we talked about theater and acting. You was it Bocelli that you said is going to go out on stage and die?
Right.
I'm going to go out on stage and die, right? It's So and firsthand example, I had a friend that was in a ballet, and she was Lady Capulet. And when Tybalt dies, there's, noted there's some type of affair between the two. It's not explicit, it's not said, but she's distraught, right? And if you think of a ballet, everything's pretty and nice, and there's no vocal, right? There's no lines, but when Tybalt dies, she is acting and drawing on everything, and she is just so distraught on stage. And my friend who played Lady Capulet did an absolutely amazing job. From all the way back in the rafters, could see how distraught, without any words, all action of how just much this affected Lady Capulet. Then afterwards, I go backstage and I congratulate Maggie, that was her name, and I congratulate Maggie on such an amazing job. I'm like, well, let's go somewhere and get drinks, right? Let's try and celebrate. She's like, I can't, right? Like, I just gave my entire performance, my stress, I died on stage, right? And I need to get my energy. I need to come back to myself. And as I wasn't a leader in that case, but say I was, you need to realize that and say, oh, okay, got it. Maggie just had a huge performance, killed it on stage. Let's give her time to come back to herself, to get out of this constant stress or this chronic stress. Give her time to relax, to come back to a zen, to flow. And I think as a leader, you need to honor that and be able to see it and be able to adjust quickly.
It reminds me of John Wooden again. What he would also say, apropos what you were describing, is it's impossible to be at our best always, but we have to be at our best when our best is required. So your friend who gave her best on that stage, now there's a process that she goes through, a debrief, rest, so that she can be at her best again the next day, because we can't always be our best. We're not designed that way. That stress, being at our best is a level of channeling our stress, but we can only be at our best when it's required. And it goes back to flow, visualization, getting us back to those moments so we can be at those best when our moments are required.
Mm-hmm. So Tom, you touched on something that I think is so important, and this comes back to both leadership, but also just like one's own self-awareness, is knowing when you're like, I can't tonight. I have to go journal or paint or do whatever, or just be alone, or maybe even just like watch something that's just really fluffy or something, And this is actually something that is trained in psychology, because psychologists have some of the worst substance abuse disorders, rates of mood disorders, rates of, even things like suicide, because you're dealing with the darkest sides of humanity. So how do you help the helper? And this is also true of leaders, right? It goes to that oxygen mask analogy in the plane. Like, you have to help yourself before you can help those around you. You have to put your oxygen mask on first, and then you can put the mask on for the kids and everyone else around you. And so this is something that there's entire classes on this in psychology, and training and learning when you need to say, I can't right now. I have to take a step back. And I think that this is important from an individual perspective, but I think it's really important from a leadership perspective to recognize that in your people, right? And so for example, for my PhD program, we had to take a couple of international trips, and every day was a very long day and full of very heavy interaction with people. We were with refugees. We were, dealing with just everything you can possibly imagine in countries all over the world. And every day at the end of the day, we would debrief. And this was an ability, an opportunity for the leader, right? So whoever the professor was, to just sit around, and everyone had the opportunity to just talk. And this is kind of what you brought up, Tom. It's not just like, oh, I'm fine. People were really talking about their experiences, what they felt, what they experienced, what this brought up from their past. So frequently people would be crying because the experiences were so profound, or because it brought up stuff from the past. And so part of that also was, look, if you cannot do stuff in the evenings, like, you need to know, and you need to have the self-awareness to say, I can't go to the group dinner, or I can't, I'm not sitting around to play cards tonight. Like I need to be in my room. I need to do whatever it is that is my self-care. And so obviously, in a workplace, it's not necessarily going to be that extreme, but the stress response is the same, regardless of situation. How people are feeling is the same when it comes to stress. So as a leader, I would say at the end of a big project, so first of all, if you have a deadline, tell your employees why. Why is that the deadline? Help them understand. What is the objective? Why is this timeline? What are we hoping to get out of this? But then, hey, guess what? It's going to be really hard for a few days. Afterwards, we're all going to sit around and we're going to debrief. We're going to take some time. We're going to decompress. And I think that's really important because then you're still getting work done. You're still meeting deadlines. You're getting over these huge hurdles, but then your employees know why you're doing it. And they also know that there's going to be some decompression at the end. And I think that's so important.
Laura and the rest of the team, I have only one tip that I use to manage stress. It's easier said than done. You face peer pressure about it. You face family pressure, business pressure, you just described it. But for years, I've always said, and I live it, that sleep is the wonder drug. And it is interesting. It's harder to do. Even at my own home, I love my wife and kids. And when I go to bed, sometimes at 7:30 on a Saturday, you can imagine, good night, Grandpa. I'm like, or when you take that sleep, you take it. And typically I'm in bed by 9:30, 9:45 every day, and I do get up early. But for me, and really for all of us, there's a reason why we sleep. Sleep is absolutely the wonder drug that people still feel like they need to hurry. They feel like they need to say, I've only got 5 hours of sleep last night. Makes them feel like they're working hard or something like that. But you got to get sleep. It is the wonder drug. Got to self-care, as you were talking about. Laura.
Yeah, it's so important. Self-care is so important. I think that's one of the best things a leader can cultivate.
One thing, Laura, that I do want to touch on too, because you talked about, if you need to know yourself and know when to say, hey, I'm not going to go out to cards or whatever, I'm going to go back and journal or whatever it is. I know before we talked about, self-pity and don't feel sorry for yourself. But like, this is not that, right? No. This is 100% not self-pity. This is empathy for yourself. Right? You are not a robot. You need to realize that you have feelings too, right? You need to figure out how to get back to your state of Zen. And that's not self-pity. Self-pity is feeling sorry for yourself, right? Don't mix the two up. And it's okay to, like knock yourself down and say, feel bad for yourself for, maybe 5 minutes, but then you get back on the horse, right? But this is not self-pity. This is understanding yourself and how to get back to a state of healthy and calm.
Guys, we've covered a lot of really awesome ground, I think, in like the last 10 minutes or so. So let me see if I can distill down some of that. And then I'd love for each of us to maybe go around and just highlight out as we close out, maybe what the most important or more salient point was for us coming out of today's discussion too. But just the last 10 minutes alone, I think it really just seems to come back to, we've all referenced just at some level of knowing yourself, right? I mean, Laura, you talked about the oxygen mask analogy. You've really got to practice self-care, self-empathy. Tom, to your point, we got to sleep, Brian. I mean, it's something I'm not good at and trying to be better at for sure. You've got to help yourself first before you can do anything. So self-management, it really comes back to that. Brian, you talked about, and we all touched this on some level, the importance of being a source of calm for your team. We just get a storm rolling around us sometimes, and people just need to see that. And if you don't have someone, if the leader is losing him or herself in the moment, that's going to have a downstream effect. It's going to affect everyone psychologically. So that's critical. And then Tom, I'm going to give you the quote of the day. I'm going to attest this to you here. So we talked about vulnerability being very, very important, and going a layer deeper and making it okay, leading with vulnerability to be able to vent yourself maybe a little bit, to make it okay to vent so that people release, so that we can then unleash creativity. So what I'm taking away from today is release so that you can unleash, and make sure that people know that it's okay to maybe talk about what's stressing them out a little bit, by letting them know that you yourself are experiencing stress in that moment and that it's okay. And that if you cultivate that environment of vulnerability, people will release some of that tension that they're experiencing. And that in and of itself will pull us back from red line, even just that maybe one little action as we go too. But as we close out here, just maybe what is the most important thing, or one or two of the most important points that you feel like each of us have taken from today as well?
I don't mind going first. And I think I will take from what Laura said, is that, we've all said some many great things on how we deal with stress, or what are ways to deal with it. But, one of the types of stressors that I know that I can't deal with, and I know most people can't deal with, are stressors that have to do with cognitive dissonance, right? When you find yourself in a period of cognitive dissonance, there's not much you can do to alleviate that stress. You are just not in alignment, and no matter how hard you push or to get into your point of flow, you're going to come right back to just not being aligned to what your end goal is. And to Brian, that might be, financials and being authentic. To Laura, that just might be being the golden nugget that she always provides for us. But whatever it is, right, you need to find that alignment. And if you're in a period of cognitive dissonance, you are never going to find that alignment. And you have to kind of rejig things and realize, you're off track and how to get back on. Yeah,
good. Thank you, Tom. Laura, any thoughts for us? Last week.
Oh, well, that was compelling. Now I kind of want to jump on that train because I do think it's so important, right? And also understanding it's okay, you can pivot. You can, right? You can change course if you're feeling that cognitive dissonance. But I have to say, I wasn't thinking of this going into this conversation, but just in what everyone has said, and it started with the very first, statement by Tom, I think self-care, I think it's huge as a leader. I think that you can't take care of others until you take care of yourself. But perhaps even more important is then your modeling behavior, right? If you model self-care for yourself, then your team is going to see that also. Oh, hey, our CEO took a mental health day and took the day off work, or took a vacation, or doesn't answer emails in the evening. Any of these other things, I think that type of thing is really important as a leader, because you're in a position where people watch what you do and they want to relate to you. And so I think self-care is really powerful.
Leadership is example. Right?
Yeah, exactly.
Brian, any last words of wisdom for us?
I just, in thinking through and listening over the past 53 minutes, I always like to say that comfort's where everything goes to die. And we need to have self-care, we need to rest, but we also need to seek out the stress, and we need to seek it out to perform at our best. And so my takeaways are all that you just described, but I want to always remind myself that I'm going to continue to seek out that stress for myself, seek good stress, and then be able to create good stress for others, because I really believe this notion that comfort's where everything. People don't always like when I say comfort, everything goes to die. They prefer things like comforts where everything goes to fail, but I'm trying to be a little bit more dramatic. I want to go seek out that stress. I think it's important to do that, and to be at our best when our best is required. You have to have that stress.
Okay.
You have to get comfortable being uncomfortable.
I love that, Laura. So I'd say my two would be those. I think, Brian, I love the way that you put it, and Laura, that's beautifully stated as well. We've got to be, creativity is going to be an uncomfortable process, and we've got to be comfortable being uncomfortable. But then as well, I think, we talked about this a lot, but Laura, the most selfless thing that you can do is practice self-care, to Brian's point. Brian, thank you for taking us in that direction. I think that was a very, very important part of this conversation. And if we don't know ourselves, we are not taking care of ourselves, we are not equipped at all to care for anybody else.
True.
So that's good points. Well, thank you guys. Appreciate the time. Thank you to everyone who joined us today. And just a reminder that we have live content every Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern. And we hope you'll join us here again next week, right here on Thursdays in the Director's Chair. Thanks a lot, guys. We'll see you next time.
All right, stay safe.
Thank you all. Take care.